Hello, everyone. Welcome to Doc NYC Spring Showcase. You've just watched the beautiful film If These Walls Could Sing. And we have the filmmaker Mary McCartney right here with us talking about the film. Welcome, Mary.
Hello, so nice to see you.
So nice to see you too. And first of all, thank you so much for that beautiful film. I did not have watching a documentary about a music studio and crying on my 2023 bingo card, but here we are. Thank you so much. Let's start from the very beginning. I know you are a photographer, like your mom. What brings you to documentary filmmaking?
Well, directing sort of feels like a natural progression from photography. I would say some of my photographic style kind of has a filmic quality to it. I'm actually in London at the moment at Sotheby's in New Bond Street, where I have an exhibition hanging, and walking around it, I was thinking it's not too dissimilar to the documentary. It's sort of the approach to the interviews that I did was similar to my photographic style. They're kind of lit in a soft, sort of collaborative, intimate way, and they're a conversation. So yeah, it felt like a real natural progression. I was actually I've been wanting to direct more. I've directed shorts and short pieces, but I've been wanting to direct more, and I was actually approached by the brilliant documentary producer John Batsek and his team, and they said, would you please, we're looking for a director for the Abbey Road documentary that we're doing, and so that's how it came about. So, and I knew John from the past, and I kind of just thought, if I'm to do my first documentary, a great safe pair of hands to work with. So that's how it came about.
And
he did like searching for, he worked on documentaries like Searching for Sugarman and One Day in September, and things pieces that I really respected.
And you said that the Abbey Road Studios for you was pretty much a playground. That beautiful picture of your parents walking a pony to the studio. When did you realize that, oh my God, like, I'm a part of history, like this building is actually a big deal?
I think when I really understood the sort of wider picture is, because before it was, we lived really close by, we'd wander in and out, and I'd effectively be seeing my mum and dad at work. But it was when I left home, I was working in London, and I was always interested in visual arts, and I was a picture editor for a music book company. And for that, I sort of stayed in touch with Abbey Road, and for work, I would end up at Abbey Road at times, and then going in as a grown-up, as an adult, not to visit my parents, but just to go to work and meet people. Then it was like, oh wow. And then I would still go in and have that really amazing feeling of, when you walk through those doors, you get this feeling of the sense of history, but it's a creative space, and the people there are so warm and friendly, and it's a real family atmosphere. So that's when I became fiercely attached to the actual people that work at Abbey Road, which working on the documentary happened again, because I met everybody all over again, and they all work so hard and create such magical music. It's just, something that I wanted to sort of encapsulate and share with the rest of the world. The reason to do the documentary really was to bring a place that I've been lucky enough to visit a lot and get to know the people that are there, or see musicians that work there, like bring that to the world globally. By watching this, you can, understand the history. Also, I didn't understand all of the history. I didn't know it was 90 years old. So, it's rekindled my love for the space.
And what, you have everyone's Spotify playlist, the who's who of everyone's Spotify playlist up on the screen. How did you gather all these luminaries, if I may? And then what was your one guiding question that you kept asking them?
I went through, before I started filming anything, I had a story producer that I worked with, and we sat down and she and I went through and we literally wrote down on bits of A4 paper and post-it notes the history, like Elgar 1931 opened the studio, and we went through a timeline, all the people that had been there, the albums, the songs, historical moments, and we put it all up around the walls. And then it was like, how do we tell this story? So who, you know, I realized is too much to fit into 90 minutes to get everyone. So then it was like, okay, let's scrap that idea. And I was like, let's do sections. So classical music in Studio One, let's pick who it's going to be. And we were like, who do we, then it was like, who do we interview? Or within the Beatles, obviously, I was lucky enough, my dad and Ringo said yes. It wasn't a given because I was attached as the director. You know, I hadn't asked anyone. If everyone had said no, that would have been a big issue for me. But so I did sections. So then Sheku, the cellist, he had played Elgar. Jacqueline Dupre had played the Elgar concerto. And then Elgar. So I was like, that's a really lovely kind of full circle moment for the classical section. Then it was like, okay, film section. Who, you know, John Williams agreed to be interviewed. So then I was like, I can tag my whole film section off him and George Lucas because they worked together. So I had to pick then session musicians, like how do we explain, you know, the caliber of session musicians. Then I had no idea Jimmy Page, Elton John were session musicians there. So it kind of happened organically. I was like, right, we need to try and interview Elton John. We need to interview Jimmy Page. Then I found out Jimmy Page was on the session for Goldfinger. So it sort of all kind of took shape like that. It's sort of, how do we tell this story in these sections? So yeah, that's how it came about.
I want to go back to the Beatles, you know, like, and it's interesting that you said it wasn't a given that they would say yes. Did it take a lot of convincing on your part?
No, luckily, I think because Abbey Road is such a much loved place, especially for the people that have worked there, because the people that they work with at Abbey Road, the technicians and the engineers, just really make it so special. And the space is such a sort of simple but inspiring space. I think people are quite nostalgic when I communicated and said, look, will you please contribute, be interviewed for the documentary. It was, you know, Elton John's interview I think is really special because I don't feel like I always see him as enthusiastic about that. It's like he's just, you can see it's really authentic and really confident and really like, it's like he's back in that time. He seems quite boyish, and you know, when he's telling the stories, when I look back on them, I could see how conversational the approach was. And then I didn't ask them all, going back to the original question, I did not ask them all the same questions. What we did with my story producer is we did like beats that we needed to hit. So I didn't want it to be like an eclectic mishmash. So I knew needed to get answer to sort of hit beats in the documentary. And then the rest I kind of tried to, my editor was like, just sort of keep them talking, get as much out of them as you can, because then a lot of it came together in the edit.
And I would also be and if this is what's on the screen, I'm fascinated by what's not. So if you could make a 10-hour long film, what would that film look like?
I think that's interesting, because I always knew the brief I was always given was a 90-minute documentary. What happened was at one point it was more like 2.5 hours. And then I kind of just kept editing it back. Like the Jacqueline Dupre section was definitely twice as long. The Pink Floyd section was a lot longer. The Beatles was sort of in it a lot more. So it was then fine tuning and getting the balance right. So I don't know. There would be a director's cut of just over like 2 hours and 15 minutes, but you could do like a TV series or like hour-long episodes, but that wasn't how I kind of visualized it in the first place. So I'm really pleased with the edit and how it was. In the end, it was hard to cut certain sections, but now when I watch it, I think it's exactly the right length. And when I've been able to sit with an audience at festivals, it feels like the right length. I'm looking at the audience and sort of, luckily I had the opportunity to go to those festivals and see the reaction for the audience. And it was as I kind of laughing at the right moments, being more emotional at the right moments. And then when it gets towards the last section, I'm like, okay, this does need to wind up now because, you know, people need to go about their lives. I feel like they get it.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's also, you know, and I've spoken to other filmmakers who've said every time they've made a documentary on the history of something looking in the past, it's also taught them a lot about the present. And I kept thinking about, you know, the anxieties surrounding the music industries today are pretty similar to what we see.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would just love to hear what you think about that.
About the anxieties of the
Yeah, I mean, how some of those anxieties are still the same, right? Like, will music survive?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because one thing that, you know, I would discuss with Amintu is like, what do you think there's a place for recording studios still today? And I mean, it's in the documentary, but it does sort of, it was like, yes, a resounding yes. But the reality was, not in the same way. It's just bands cannot afford to go into a studio. Most bands cannot, or artists cannot afford to go into a studio for 3 to 6 months and just indulge. It's sort of like, but it's a really important meeting place for musicians, and somewhere where you can go and you close the doors, and it's not in your bedroom with, you know, all the technical equipment. It's in a dedicated space, purpose built for recording at the highest quality. There's always going to be a space. And Abbey Road, and I hope it comes across in the documentary, been really good at moving with the times and adapting and bringing in the film scores. You know, it was a very touch and go time. They needed that contract, and now they're like still known as the, you know, they're booked up all the time. And one funny thing is, I literally found it so hard to find time to book all the people when I was interviewing, because I wanted to do a lot at the studio, and it was like, well, it's busy. And I'm like, well, I need some space to do these. And the studio one, the beauty shots in the studios, I was like, we need to empty out the studio because there's a lot of stuff against the back wall. And I'm like, no, I'm doing the beauty shots for the Abbey Road documentary. We need to clear. If you could see the camera behind and you see all the boxes everywhere. Oh, but my point is, it's a busy studio, and it's sort of booked up for the next year non-stop. So I'm very happy about that. So we don't need to worry about it in the immediate future.
I also love your commentary on race, and you did not make it like this is about race, but you know, and you spoke about it a minute ago, that how, and even the studio manager says that the Abbey Road studios were and like was an expensive option, which obviously was not available to, say, musicians of color starting out. So for pretty much the first few decades, we don't see musicians of color, and then it's very interesting how you blended that in. That's
true, except one thing I would have loved to have added is that I found out when we were doing the early research phase that Paul Robeson recorded. He was one of the first people to record at Abbey Road. The amazing, you know, Paul Robeson, for, you know, it was an amazing, was he a tenor? He was like an amazing black male singer, American, but for some reason he was in London for a while, and he was one of the first people who recorded at Abbey Road. But he there was no footage of it, and there were no pictures. There were just the session sheets, so there was not enough material for me to add him. But I kind of would have loved to, because he had such a powerful voice as well. I would have loved to have opened with him. So, you know, I had some boundaries, but yeah, I wanted to show the balance of people that have played there. I mean, I thought it was very important to have the Fela Kuti section.
Yeah.
that he'd come over, and that Afrobeat, and that they'd all come over, and it just, I think you know what you're going to get with Abbey Road. It's like, oh, this is what it's going to be like, and it's all these, you know, bands from the 60s, and then suddenly it's like, whew, Afrobeat. I love it.
Honestly, and I started it out as a complaint, but it's not a complaint anymore. But I thought there would be much more of the Beatles.
Oh,
because
yeah.
because in our popular imagination,
Yeah.
you know, it's so much like, you know, they're almost interrelated and almost the same entity. So did you ever have to make that artistic choice of not showing too much or showing too little of the Beatles?
Yeah, what I did at first was I was like, figured out the sort of order, and I actually thought there would be less Beatles, because I was like, when we're 90 years, I'm going to concentrate on the things that people don't know about so much. So in my mind, I was like, I'm actually going to surprise people by not having so much Beatles. But then I kind of realized they were the one band that literally utilized every single nook and cranny of Abbey Road, and they recorded all bar one album there. So I was like, there's not really any way around it. Also, I love them. So I thought it was, and also what I did was I put it in sort of chronologically, and then I thought, well, then we'll play around with it and we'll edit it down. And then it became more about like, what do you need there for the narrative of the story? For, you know, I think it's there for a reason. You know, talking about the day in the life, it also talks about the Studio One and the orchestra, and how the fact that the Beatles were probably, would they've even had all those orchestral sections on their recordings if they hadn't been on Abbey Road? I don't know, but you know, seeing those pianos, you know, the orchestra in Studio One may allow them to experiment more. And I loved learning about the fact of the instruments just sort of lying around in the studios. So I put them in. I knew they were going to just be a big part of the documentary, but then I kind of tweaked it until I felt like it was significant, because I really think the artists and musicians as well. You know, you couldn't get from the fact that they were there consistently throughout their career.
Absolutely. And did you come to know of anything new about the Beatles while making this film that you didn't know before?
Tons, yeah, loads. I didn't know about the 3-hour recording sessions that they had to arrive, you know, rehearsed, ready to go. I did not know the thing I was just saying about the instruments lying around, like Mrs. Mills' piano that ended up on the Lady Madonna because it was just in the corner of the studio, and they're like, oh, what does that sound like? I didn't know that there's a section, I couldn't quite figure how to fit it, but so it's not in the documentary. It's Abbey Road also was well known for comic recordings. George Harrison would like the Goons and Peter Sellers would record there, and so there was a cupboard under the stairs in Studio 2 that had sound effects, like funny sound effects for on the radio or on recordings. So I didn't know that, and those kind of things came onto, you know, on what they'd be on Yellow Submarine, for instance, those kind of things. Those props and things being at Abbey Road really worked their way onto Beatles tracks. So it sort of shows this real love of the building and love of the space, and they felt safe there. And I think a lot of the people recording there felt safe and looked after, and therefore, you know, inspired to create.
I also thought, like, you know, going back to my question about, you know, the contemporary anxieties around music, I just don't think we have the time, space, money, whatever, to just like let a band be in the studio, make it their home, do whatever you want, get your artist friends, do the cover. I also think that there's been a shift in that ideology of what it means to be making music.
In what sense? In the sense that people don't you don't feel they immerse themselves in the same way.
Yeah, maybe the industry has just moved towards, I mean, I don't know, perhaps it's more, I would say transactional, but I don't want to take the art away from it. But it's like, when is it coming out? How much money is it making? Is it a hit or not? You know, that kind of a thing.
I think part of that is due to the process. What you're touching on is, you know, we're not on tape anymore. It's, you know, you can, like with digital photography, you can photograph and film and record so much, and then you have to decipher all of that. Whereas with tape, it's like a certain amount you can do in a time, and then you know, play it back and consider it. It's just a very different, in a way, more tactile way of working. It's a different thought process, and it was more elitist. Not everyone could do it. So suppose now there's so many more people in the marketplace, so maybe that's why. But I understand what you're saying, but I think there's more to sift through, but I think it's still there. The talent's still there. And the great thing about it is everyone can do it if they want to. They can do it on their phone. You could make an album in a way, you could argue. But there's something really special about that pilgrimage to a recording studio, and the mindset of sort of your time doesn't, there is no time. It's sort of like you don't know what time it is. You almost don't know what day it is. It's like you just get lost in the process.
And I know we have to wrap up soon, but like I could like go on talking to you about this documentary.
We're like best friends now.
Okay, I'm gonna call my mom and say that. But have the people in the film watched the completed documentary yet?
Yeah, I've had messages from a lot of the people, and they have. I had a really nice email from Roger Waters from the Pink Floyd section saying he'd really enjoyed it, which was great because he was quite hard. He was my most difficult interview to get. It was hard to sort of get him to agree and then to sort of tie him down. So, but we had this really incredible evening for the premiere in London at Abbey Road in Studio One, just before Christmas. And it's an incredible evening because they put out all those red orchestral chairs, and they put in a big screen, like a film screen, and then amazing speakers. And we sat there and we watched the documentary in Studio One, which has never happened before. So sections where John Williams is talking about it, and then the big sort of Star Wars orchestral archive footage comes up. We were like, we're there right now in this space watching it. And so it was absolutely incredible. And my dad and Ringo and Elton John and Sheku and Celeste, all who were interviewed, were there for that evening. So it was really amazing. It was really amazing, and also terrifying, because I was like, what if they don't like it? But ultimately incredible. For the part where Elton's like, your dad may not have known how much that meant to me when he came in, and then Dad watched it with Elton sitting next to him saying, you know, they had this moment to be able to say, I really meant that. It was really emotional and incredible.
Yeah, and I've never met these people, but I got so emotional with the end footage where
Celeste is incredible as well. That the singer Celeste, I'd photographed her a few times within my portrait photography for projects. And so when I saw that she was on the list, having recorded there, very important to me was the ending of the documentary. I have to say, it was one of the things that I thought hardest about, because I think a lot of these, from my personal point of view, when I watch documentaries about a building or a space like this that has such a history and so much love, I find that often it can peter out and seem a bit of an anticlimax at the end. So I really was determined to be like, I want to go out with, you know, emotion. And then when I saw Celeste had performed there, and I knew her, so I'd met her, so I knew what she was capable of. I was like, this is it, we need to get that. That's what we need to do. And it just worked in perfectly with the emotion, what everyone was saying. And that's the thing, is I think ultimately I wanted to do a documentary where I could bring the public into Abbey Road, so hopefully they would feel that they had been to that space and they knew that space intimately. And also I wanted them to feel emotion for the building, that maybe they didn't even realize why they should, sort of be like, wow, this is actually making me feel emotional, which again was the challenge. So yeah, that's what I set out to do.
So this is for real. My last question. Will you be making more documentaries? And I hope you say yes. And
I love the way you're like, this is my last one, and it's A and B. So Macy, it's not my last two questions. Is there going to be a C in this as well? So
no,
3 questions.
no, B is going to be it. And B, what do you, when people watch this film, as they will, and as they just have, what do you want their biggest takeaway from the film to be?
Well, number one, yes, I would love to direct another documentary. I've definitely I loved working with the team. There was really good chemistry between me and my team, and it was challenging, but in a really thought-provoking and stimulating way. So I definitely would like to. It's just sort of finding what that project will be. And then B, my takeout is I wanted to produce a documentary which all age groups and generations would be able to watch and find interesting and take from. And as I was saying, feel something about it, like not just be like, oh yeah, history lesson, this is technically what happens, you know, care about it in some way, and also feel good after it. Feel like we all love music, and that feeling music gives you. I think the opportunity to direct this documentary gave me the opportunity to sort of visually sum up and bring something into people's homes and lives where you get that warm feeling about music that inspires you. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. And you know, if you need this inspiration again and again, luckily for us, the documentary is streaming on Hulu and Disney Plus, because I'm sure each one of you want to watch it again. And thank you so much, Mary, for joining us today. Thank you to our audiences for listening to this edition of Doc NYC Spring Showcase. And the biggest thank you to Disney Plus for sharing this film with us. If you liked this Q&A, be sure to check out the other Doc NYC Spring Showcase screenings and Q&As. Thank you once again for joining us today.